Welcome to another edition of the New York MRA Hot Seat. I'm here with a special guest today, John Bremer, Chief Research Officer for Toluna. John, welcome.
Hi, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Really excited about this. You've been in the industry a long time. Our paths crossed before when you and I both worked at Harris Interactive together. So I know you've got a great breadth of knowledge, and I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective. The way we normally start this off is to give everyone an opportunity to tell us about their company, a little shameless plug. So if you can take maybe 30 seconds and tell me about what you've been doing and your company, that'd be great.
Sure. So I've recently joined Toluna, which is one of the leading sample provider companies out there. And what I'll say for Toluna is they have a real emphasis on quality, and that's one of the reasons that they've decided to bring someone like me in. So what I'm responsible for is ensuring the highest level of quality for our clients, ensuring that they get the right respondents, ensuring that any of the sort of typical negative aspects of sample provision don't come into play. So people who are speeding through, who are fraudulent, so all of those sort of fall under my purview, and there's a real commitment towards that at Toluna.
Great. So you've had some recent experiences with the sample blending and things like that we're going to talk about today. But let's look at the industry as a whole. Where do you see the industry going in the next 5 years? What do you see maybe impacting the way we do research today?
So I think we're actually in for an exciting time in the next 5 years. One of the things that's obvious is that we now have access to more information. So we have more ways of surveying people, but at the same time we're bringing in sort of behavioral information we know for a fact about individuals. And it really is sort of the bringing together of this information that I think will be a real explosive event for the industry, allowing us to provide better information for our clients. We've been talking about mobile for a while. It's starting to creep into the equation, but I think people are starting to think about, how do I actually use mobile? Is it purely as a replacement for surveys? Is it to do something different? And I think we're getting into the arena that we're looking at the different capabilities we have, not as a replacement for the others, but as an augment. And I think all of those will be taken together, and that's an exciting time for us.
Yeah, outstanding. So talking about mobile, I mean, that's exciting. It's new. It's something that a lot of people are trying to embrace, but there's still a lot of traditional research. And, obviously I come from the telephone world originally, but today, online research is as much traditional as anything. How does, so let's talk about the sampling and some of those aspects. There's a great deal of discussion about sample blending and how it impacts things. So you mentioned mobile, but let's talk about maybe your perspective on sample blending and how that applies, and maybe some unique examples that you can provide.
Sure. So, along with sort of the bringing together of information, we also have more sources. So within the online space, we have, and it's interesting to now call them traditional panels. 10 years ago they were the new thing on the block, but now they're sort of the traditional bedrock of the online industry. We have river type provision. We're going more into social networks, things of that nature. The question is, how do you bring these all together? Any sample source itself will have positives and negatives. And if you're using multiple sample sources, or even just multiple providers, you might have different effects from that. So one of the things that I think is actually imperative is that we look at each sample source as a pool of individuals. Some people tend to think of a sample source as an entire entity. I like to think of it as a pool of individuals. They have certain characteristics, and there might be some bias that flows through the entire sample source, but if we look at them as individuals and start constructing our samples, blending our samples on that basis, we can do a much better job than we're doing today. So, for example, if we have some baseline to compare what a representative sample looks like, and we start bringing in individuals from different sample sources and filling in that, our sample in that manner, we can actually fill up, the areas where we might be weak in one sample. As long as we measure it, we can bring in individuals from other samples that are strong in that area. And so, one of the things that we've done is we've created a technique called sample smart blend. And again, it takes a baseline. It measures individuals against that baseline and either okays them for inclusion into a survey or not based on their characteristics. And it's very important that you go beyond demographics. I think we can do an amazing job of blending on demographics. But any of the biases, particularly the selection biases that we actually see in samples, will be on attitude, behaviors, things of that nature. So you've got to go beyond that. That's, I think, imperative going forward.
Great. So that brings up the biggest question I have. The debate for a long time has been sample quality, sample quality. Are we getting better? I think for a while there I would have argued that absolutely not, but today I'm hearing and seeing some positive changes. So are we getting better? And are the various initiatives, are they having an impact?
Yeah, so I have to admit I'm biased on these. I actually sit on some of the initiatives out there, so of course my answer is going to be yes. But we'll take this with a grain of reality as well. So there are two aspects. I really do think that the focus on quality, sort of understanding who's in your sample, making sure they're giving reliable answers, things of that nature, is only making us get better. Sort of starting with the ARF and P&G's sort of march towards quality. I think that did a lot for the industry. I'm going to now say something controversial, which I think on the flip side, I think we have an awful lot of quality initiatives out there. They're all good intention, but one thing I do worry about with having so many out there is they all focus on something slightly different. And so a reasonable firm could actually say, hey, look, I meet the points of this initiative, and so therefore I must have high quality. But if it's something that doesn't really matter or isn't exactly what the rest of the industry considers quality, whereas they can claim quality, it may not be. So one of the things, and I think this is starting to happen, is a lot more. I'd like to see a lot more communication between the initiatives that are out there, and I do think that's actually happening now. I do think we're better off these days. We're concerned, and just to say something else controversial, clients that in the past may not have cared about quality now know at least they have to ask about quality. They may not care, and there are a lot of clients out there that do care. Don't get me wrong, but everyone at least has to be seen as caring about quality, and I think that can be nothing but positive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that for the longest time, people kind of just bury their heads in the sand a little bit because it was about filling jobs. Everybody was having the same issue. All the panels are facing the same challenges. So if we're going to do online research, we have to live in that world. But I don't think that's the case today. And I think our industry needs to focus on this. And you brought up the initiatives, and one of the things that I think is probably concerning for me, but hearing that people like you are involved in this, it's great. But it's a lot of volunteers that sit on those initiatives, which means that they've still got a job to do, and their focus is not necessarily on driving those. So once initiatives are in place, who's really policing that? Who's really championing that? But it sounds like you've kind of thought through that. Any thoughts on that? How that?
Yeah, actually, I do. I think a lot of examples are there are people like me. There are people like, and I'll just throw out a few names. Michael Fallig at GFK, whose job is to ensure that when GFK asks for a sample, it's of high quality. So he sits on these initiatives, and he has an incentive to ensure that things get done because it's helping his job, himself at his own job.
Right.
And that's just one example. I think they've got the right folks in who have an incentive to actually do something. And it's, I'm sort of an economist by nature, so I think incentives are great. People want to differentiate on quality, so they have to define quality. People want to actually provide quality in our case, so we need to, define it and make sure we actually follow through on it. Folks on the full service side need to ensure that they're getting the best data for their clients. So they have an incentive to actually work on these committees. And so I'm actually seeing a lot of things getting done. I will admit some, at the beginning of the quality initiatives, things languished a little bit. But as quality became the catchword in the industry, people understood that they have a real incentive to actually do something, and that's why I'm actually pretty positive on the direction we're going.
Outstanding. Well, this has been great, John. I really appreciate your perspective. Anything else you want to add about sample blending, things people should take away?
Yeah, so anytime anyone thinks about sample blending, ask what the sources are that people are recruiting from, where they're coming from, what they're actually doing. And the flip side to sample blending is also data fusion. And so how can you effectively merge the data sources that you actually have? And again, I always go back to you've got to consider this on the individual level. Again, these are pools of respondents, and if you're not considering things as pools of respondents and just the source of itself, you're not being as effective as you possibly could be.
That's great insight. Well, thank you, John. Thanks on behalf of the New York MRA. And once again, this has been another edition of the New York MRA Hot Seat.
Thanks, Paul.
You bet.